In the long memory of the Nile, empires rise from its banks like the annual flood and recede into the desert sands. We remember Egypt, of course, but south of its famous temples, where the river's green ribbon is knotted by the stone of the great cataracts, another power once held the entire valley in its grasp. This was the kingdom of Kush, a dynasty of black pharaohs who claimed the double crown of Egypt itself, of iron forgers whose furnaces glowed in the Nubian night, and of warrior queens who faced down the legions of Rome. Their story is not one of a forgotten footnote, but of a second, southern heart for the Nile Valley, a heart that beat for 1,000 years before it, too, fell silent. Today, we trace the river south, to the land of dark kings and steep pyramids, and ask how this Sudanese empire rose to command the world's longest river, and why its bustling iron capital slowly emptied into the sand. Our story of empire begins not with a collapse, but with a restoration. By the middle of the 8th century before the Common Era, Egypt, the ancient heartland, was fractured. Warlords in the Nile Delta carved out petty kingdoms, forgetting the unity that had made their civilization timeless. But from the south, a king was watching. From his capital at Napata, near the holy mountain of Gebel Barkal, King Piye of Kush saw not just weakness, but heresy. Around 728 BCE, he assembled his army. This was no mere raid for plunder. It was, in his eyes, a holy war to reunite the two lands under the authority of the god Amun, whose cult thrived as much in Kush as it did in Egypt. He sailed north, his fleet cleaving the Nile's current, on a mission to put the world right. We do not have to guess at Piye's motives. He left his own voice, carved into a towering granite stela. He tells of capturing city after city, but his focus is on piety, not just power. He describes the Delta lords he defeated, princes like Tefnacht of Sais, as unrighteous. Upon reaching the ancient capital of Memphis, he refused to storm it in a bloody assault. Instead, he made offerings, purified himself, and let the city's majesty persuade it to open its gates. In his own words, the northern lords eventually came to him, crawling on their bellies, their legs trembling. He had not just conquered Egypt. He had, in his view, cleansed it. He took the double crown not as a foreign invader, but as the true, legitimate pharaoh. For the next century, Kushite kings ruled as Egypt's 25th dynasty. Men like Shabaka, Shebitku, and the great Taharqa sat on the throne of the pharaohs, their authority stretching 1,800 kilometers from the plains of Sudan to the shores of the Mediterranean. But they did not rule like conquerors seeking to impose a new culture. Instead, they did the opposite. They launched a renaissance. They saw themselves as heirs to Egypt's oldest traditions, which the northern lords had allowed to decay. Their policy was one of deliberate archaism, a return to the greatness of the past. They commissioned statues in the severe, powerful style of the Old Kingdom from 1,000 years before. They copied and preserved ancient religious texts. They poured Kushite gold and resources into restoring the magnificent temples at Thebes and Memphis. To be Kushite was to be more truly Egyptian than the Egyptians themselves. The rule of Taharqa, from 690 to 664 BCE, marked the dynasty's peak. He was a master builder and a formidable commander. At Karnak, the religious heart of Egypt, he erected a massive colonnade in the main courtyard, a bold statement of his power and piety. But he did not neglect his southern homeland. Far upriver in Nubia, at sites like Kawa and Sanam, he built new temples to Amun, bringing Egyptian artisans and styles deep into Kush. He treated the entire Nile Valley as a single canvas for his ambition, binding north and south with shared monuments to a shared god. For a generation, It must have seemed that this unified kingdom, built on Nubian strength and Egyptian tradition, was as permanent as the river itself. But permanence is an illusion, and while Taharqa built in stone, a new kind of empire was being forged in iron and terror to the northeast. The Neo-Assyrian Empire was a relentless military machine. Its kings did not seek to restore traditions, they sought to break them. They demanded tribute, and where it was denied, they brought unparalleled destruction. In 671 BCE, the Assyrian king Esarhaddon marched his armies across the Sinai Desert and struck at the heart of Kushite power in Egypt. He captured Memphis. The blow was stunning. Taharqa, wounded in the fighting, was forced to retreat south to Thebes, abandoning Lower Egypt. The long, unified street of the Nile had been cut in two. Taharqa would not give up. He fought to reclaim the north, but the Assyrians were too strong, too ruthless. Under Esarhaddon's successor, Ashurbanipal, they returned, and in 663 BCE they delivered a blow from which Kushite Egypt would never recover. The Assyrian army marched south and fell upon Thebes, the sacred city of Amun, the southern capital. For centuries, Thebes had been regarded as inviolable. The Assyrians showed it no mercy. They sacked its temples, tore down its statues, and carried off its treasures and its people. The event sent a shockwave across the ancient world. It was more than a military defeat. It was a sacrilege, and it shattered the illusion of Kushite invincibility, ending their effective control over all of Egypt. The loss of Egypt was not instantaneous, but a slow, bleeding retreat. The Kushite pharaohs clung to power in the south for a time, but the momentum was gone. By 656 BCE, the dynasty's authority in the north had evaporated. The political center of gravity shifted decisively back upriver to Napata. But even their homeland was not safe. In 593 BCE, a resurgent Egyptian dynasty, the 26th, struck back. Pharaoh Psamtik II marched an army deep into Nubia, reaching Napata itself. His soldiers left inscriptions on the temples, a permanent scar of humiliation. This raid may have been the final catalyst for a decision that had been brewing for generations. The heart of Kush needed to move. The court moved south, past the treacherous 4th and 5th cataracts, to a new location, Meroë. It was a strategic retreat, but also a calculated advance into a new economic and cultural reality. Meroë was safer from northern invasion, but more importantly, it was perfectly positioned. It sat at the nexus of caravan routes that crossed the desert east to the Red Sea and west into the heart of Africa. And crucially, the lands around Meroë were rich in iron ore, and the acacia forests needed to make charcoal for smelting. While Napata had looked north to Egypt for its identity, Meroë would look south, east, and west. It was a bet on a new future, one built not on controlling ancient temples, but on controlling the arteries of trade and the technology of iron. And for centuries, that bet paid off. From the 3rd century BCE onward, Meroë became one of the great industrial centers of the ancient world. Its furnaces burned day and night. The evidence is still there, in vast black mounds of industrial slag, some rising several meters high, that dwarf the ruins of the royal city. This was iron production on a massive scale. The rhythm of the city was the pump of the leather bellows, the roar of the fire, the crack of cooling metal. Meroitic iron was fashioned into tools for farmers, giving them harder plows to work the soil. And it was forged into weapons, spears, swords, and arrowheads that equipped Kushite armies and likely became a valuable export, making Meroë a regional power broker. With this new economic base came a vibrant new culture. While the god Amun was still revered, new, distinctly Meroitic deities rose to prominence, chief among them the lion-headed god Apedemak. At temples in Naka and Musawarat es-Sufra, reliefs show kings and queens in uniquely Kushite regalia, rich robes, elaborate jewelry, and distinctive crowns, worshipping their own gods. And most remarkably, they began to write in their own script. By the 2nd century BCE, the Meroitic script appeared, a unique alpha-syllabary used for official and religious texts. It was a declaration of independence from Egyptian cultural dominance. The tragedy for us is that while we can sound out the letters, the Meroitic language remains largely undeciphered. The full story of this kingdom is written in a language we can see, but cannot yet fully understand. Meroë's confidence and power were put to the ultimate test in the late 1st century BCE. Following Rome's conquest of Egypt in 30 BCE, the unstoppable Roman legions became Kush's new northern neighbors. Conflict was inevitable. Around 25 BCE, Kushite forces under the command of their formidable queen, the Queen Amanirenas, stormed the Roman frontier forts at Syene and Elephantine. They toppled statues of the Emperor Augustus, carrying one of his bronze heads back to Meroë as a trophy. Rome's response was swift and brutal. The prefect Gaius Petronius marched his legions south, sacking Napata and taking thousands of prisoners. But he could not hold the territory, and Amanirenas was not broken. What happened next is extraordinary. After further skirmishes, Meroitic envoys met with Augustus himself. Amanirenas negotiated a peace treaty in 21 BCE that was stunningly favorable. The Romans withdrew to their old border, a buffer zone was established, and most importantly, Kush was exempted from paying any tribute to Rome. For a kingdom on the fringe of the empire to stare down Augustus and emerge as a sovereign, untaxed neighbor was a diplomatic masterstroke. And as for that bronze head of the emperor, it was buried beneath the steps of a temple in Meroë, so that everyone who entered would symbolically tread upon the face of the Roman emperor. A final, daily act of defiance, sealed in stone and earth. For nearly 3 centuries after the peace with Rome, Meroë thrived. But the forces that would undo it were not military, but economic. The world was changing. The Ptolemaic and then Roman rulers of Egypt invested heavily in developing seaports on the Red Sea coast, like Berenik. These ports allowed ships to sail directly to Arabia and India, bypassing the long, slow, and expensive caravan journey up the Nile. It was a global shift in logistics. The Great River, which had for millennia been the primary highway of wealth and goods, was becoming a quiet back road. The lifeblood of Meroë, the trade in ivory, ebony, incense, and gold from Africa's interior, was being diverted. The caravans that arrived at the city gates grew smaller and less frequent. The decline was not a sudden collapse, but a slow, creeping paralysis that lasted for generations. We can see it in the archaeology. The tombs of Meroë's elite from the 3rd and 4th centuries CE contain far fewer imported luxury goods, less Roman glass, fewer Mediterranean wine amphorae. The wealth was drying up. Royal building projects ceased. The great iron furnaces fell cold, one by one. The city's population likely dwindled as its economic reason for being faded away. As the central authority of Meroë weakened, nomadic groups on its frontiers, like the Noba and the Blemmyes, grew bolder, raiding deeper into the kingdom's territory. The empire was fraying from the edges in. The end, when it came, seems to have been driven by a rival power to the southeast. The kingdom of Aksum, based in the highlands of modern-day Ethiopia, was rising as Meroë pointed. Aksum had embraced the new Red Sea trade and grown powerful from it. In the mid-4th century CE, an Aksumite king named Ezana erected victory stelae boasting of his campaigns into Kushite territory, where he defeated peoples he called the Noba and the Kasu, the Kushites. The exact nature of these campaigns is debated. Was it a final, decisive conquest that destroyed the city of Meroë? Or was Ezana simply kicking down a rotten door, conducting raids into a kingdom that was already a shadow of its former self? The latter seems more likely. The end was not a single dramatic sack, but a final push into a long, hollowed-out core. By the late 4th century, the great royal city of Meroë was quiet. Its furnaces were cold, its palaces empty. New cultures and successor kingdoms would eventually rise along the Sudanese Nile, but the legacy of Kush was not erased. It remains etched into the landscape. Today, more than 200 steep, narrow pyramids mark the royal cemeteries of Meroë, a forest of stone monuments that outnumbers the famous pyramids of Egypt. They still cut the skyline like sharp teeth against the desert sun. The temples to the lion god Apetamak still stand at Naka, their reliefs a testament to a unique cultural vision. And Piye's victory, Stela, still speaks from the shadow of Gebel Barkal. These stones are the silent witnesses to an empire measured by a river. Kush rose by mastering the Nile's corridor, and fell when the world's currents of trade began to flow elsewhere, leaving its great iron heart to slowly cool in the sand. The story of Kush is a powerful reminder that history's great highways can become tomorrow's forgotten paths. If you found yourself drawn down this ancient river, subscribe to Dustkings for more journeys to the heart of fallen empires. There are many more ruins to explore. Let us know in the comments which collapse you'd like to see us investigate next. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you among the stones next time.